Let's face it, being on call sucks. There is no doubt about it that being woken up even in the middle of the day or even get an email in the middle of the day that something bad has happened is just not fun. So everything we do around monitoring and supporting applications is in service of making the life of those on call a little less painful, whether you're an on-call developer or an SRE who's basically driving the on-call process. So thanks for coming to my session where I'm going to talk about all things on call and talk about how the SRE role, and not just the role, the culture and the practice are transforming DevOps. My name is Chris Riley. I am a senior technology advocate at Splunk. Basically means that I'm a bad coder turned advocate. I could not give up the application development process, but at the same time, I wasn't all that great at it. So now I talk about it and I interview companies and I find out how organizations are assimilating these new practices and dealing with the challenges of modern application delivery. If you want to find out more, scan that QR code and you can get access to my various social information, and please reach out. I love hearing from people who have attended my sessions. Now, the first thing I think I need to convince you of is that transformation is a feature of your organization and your team. Change is constant. I love it when I work with enterprises who treat change like a project. Like, we have a problem, change is coming, we're going to address it in 6 months, and then by the time we're done, we're hands off and we've solved it. The reality is I've never seen a project work that way. Usually by the time you're done with some sort of transformation project, things have already changed again. So it's not appropriate to think about change and transformation as a thing that you do one time. It's constant. Why does that matter in this conversation? Well, if it is a feature, if it is constant, you need to build a strategy around it. You need to make it part of your organization, not just something that you address sometimes. But change is happening faster than it ever has before. We are dealing with application architectures that have changed, and cultures that have changed, and organizations that have changed. All because customers demand more. They're getting used to more and more digitally delivered services. We're not shipping CDs anymore. And really, when we talk about applications, we should be talking about services, not just applications. So what used to be monolithic infrastructure where we were deploying code onto a server that never changed, that server usually had a name. It was the Billy Bob server. Every 2 weeks, you restarted the Billy Bob server because it always had disk issues or memory issues or page files or whatever it is. But it was fairly easy, intuitive how to fix it. You looked at an event, you looked at a log, you knew exactly what to do because it was always the same place. But application architectures today do not look at this. You know this, microservices. You're at a DevOps event. You have talked about microservices. I'm not teaching you about microservices. But the complexity of these distributed environments cannot be underestimated. And sometimes we don't realize that in the monolithic world, the operator, those in charge of operating the application, had a mental model of how the application worked. They didn't need to go and look up architectures necessarily. Like, they generally understood the relationship of all the components in the application and the infrastructure. Well, modern applications, that's not even possible. It's not even an option. There's too many of them. They're ephemeral. They all have their own life cycle. They all have their own stack. You can't just expect to understand the relationship between all the components of the application. So because of this, we simply cannot support these applications the same way. The applications have changed, so how we operate them fundamentally needs to change. And that includes the people who operate them and their responsibilities. Because monitoring is no longer a static function that you can just set up and reliably monitor your applications. And you're not just touching infrastructure anymore. Monitoring has to go all the way from the front end all the way down to the machine. And because of this, and because of the touch points with the developers and the application itself, developers need an operational peer. They can't be separate. I'm not saying that SRE and operations are a part of the development org, although that happens a lot. They have to be peers. They have to be collaborating on a regular basis, not just on a project basis. And the reality is today, everyone is on call. I like it when I talk to developers and I say, on-call developers. And I get scoffs. At Splunk, our developers are on call for the services they build. Some people kind of push back against that. But the reality is you are on call. I don't care if you're not holding a pager, you are on call. And actually, if you're not on a rotation and actually on call, then if an incident or an issue gets to you, it's probably even more problematic and is going to require more of your effort to address than if you were a part of the rotation early on. So everybody is on call always in an organization. Issues can get big enough that everybody will be addressing them. And the way we tended to look at this was more in the knock model. And this has parity with monolithic applications where our schedules were managed by spreadsheets. We had lists of people that we would contact for specific issues. We had 24/7 staffed operations center who were looking at dashboards, hunting for red and yellow notifications. Typically, operations centers were only focused on infrastructure, barely touched the application at all, because the release cadence wasn't enough to really think about it. And it was tend to be very IT focused with very little dev experience. Mobilization usually happened in two different ways. First is spray and pray, where you blast out the entire list and hope that the right person picks it up and addresses it. Or lazy mobilization, where you find that one person who resolves everything. You can rely on them to resolve everything, but you're on a quick path to burnout. It's not that the knock model was bad at the time that it was highly leveraged. And now, with people working from home, the knock has already changed. You don't have that center where you can be staring at all of the screens. But really, the SRE model is meant to replace this, where it relies heavily on automation, where application is also part of what you're supporting, not just the infrastructure, where anybody and everybody can be on call. Maybe your organization doesn't make everybody on call, but they can be. There's a possibility for it. And now you can't just stare at dashboards. It has to be both a strategy, a role, and people who are on call themselves. So this is why SRE is so important. And there's a good chance, you being at a DevOps event, you've already bought into this and you understand this. But there's some nuances of the role and what I've seen in organizations who have been successful, more successful with SRE function than others. One of them is that you can't just rename your NOC or your operations practice to SRE and change some of the tactics and expect to fully embrace the SRE model. It's more than that, and it also involves culture. It involves hiring. It involves a lot of different elements. But first, why are we even trying to do this? Well, customers are demanding more. More and more enterprises are engaging with their end users or their stakeholders via cloud-native applications. It's convenient. You can deliver value faster. You can provide more data and richer experiences. But it's not just about the functionality in your application anymore. The performance of the application is a feature. The security of the application is a feature. People are concerned about their privacy, that if they use their application, they're using a secure application. And anymore, if a slow button click takes too long, users will consider this a flaw in the application. So latency is even considered down. You can't just rely on full outages in the incident response world now. You have to be addressing the experience. And SREs is all about the experience. This is Jonathan. He works at Splunk. He is one of the SRE managers at Splunk. And he mentioned to me that SRE is all about being customer obsessed, working back from the end user and understanding what does it take to deliver on their expectations. Yes, granted, user expectations are pretty crazy. But you've experienced this yourself, I'm sure. So during COVID times, I had subscribed to maybe, well, it is COVID times. I have subscribed to maybe 3, 4, 5 SaaS-based services. A few of them I unsubscribed from very quickly. The quality of the content was great, maybe even superior. One was a remote learning, one was a workout. I was very happy with the content, which is the features, but the performance of the application was subpar. Your application is a reflection of the team that built it. And no team is going to say they've hired bad engineers. So what is the difference? Because users will unsubscribe from applications not because of functionality only, but also because of its performance. And so this is where it is a feature. And to demonstrate to the world that you are a high-performing engineering team, you are going to be serious about the SRE function and how you monitor your applications. Now, the SRE doesn't just need to be a role. And some organizations practice SRE practices, which I believe is service reliability engineering, not site reliability engineering, because what we're delivering is a service, without actually having the role. And that's fine. Cloud operations engineers, there's a lot of other different titles that are used. But it's all about modernizing the NOC. So getting away from the static NOC concept where the dashboard tells you what happens, then you respond. It's a pull. To switching to a push model where the tools, the system tells you what's going on and where you should focus your attention to resolve the issue. It supports shift left. We've heard this term shift left. You can't shift left to the developer and just expect them to have more work. They already have enough work. That's not what shift left means. Shift left means you incorporate automation and strategy so that things can happen earlier in the delivery chain. Not that the developers are doing it necessarily, but if they are doing it, they are enabled. To keep pace with release velocity, as release velocity increases, you have to have the practices and the tools to support it. To keep pace with customer demands, I think I've already beat that one up. And to be an operational partner for developers. Developers understand how important operations are. I mean, most developers today really understand that they can't just build functionality and hope it runs okay. They have to build functionality and believe and know and understand that it is running in production well for the users, because the user's experience determines what future functionality they're going to be able to continue to build. But the problem is they can't be thinking about it all day long. And so SREs need to be stewards to help with that process. And that's really how we see the SRE function. So Splunk has a lot of SREs. We have SREs for different product lines. And I love engaging with them because their mentality and attitude, I think, is really impressive. And I think it says a lot about the evolution of DevOps since the 2008 timeframe. So most of what I'm about to say on this slide is regarding how we run our SRE practice. But I've also seen this consistently done in other organizations, and it's really powerful. So our SREs are responsible first for the strategy of metrics and on-call. What does that mean, the strategy of? Well, if you're going to onboard a new service, those services need to be observable, visible. The SREs are the ones who say, this is the minimum amount of metrics, data we need. This is how it should be instrumented to make sure that your new service is observable. Metrics. But they're the global metrics, and that's important. Because service level metrics can be detailed to the point where the service owner understands it, but that's it. But you also need to have global metrics that everybody in the organization can understand, no matter the service. And that's usually standard metrics like RED, rate, error, duration, or use for infrastructure, utilization, saturation, and errors. But they can be different for your organization. Like, you don't just have to leverage what Google told us to do, but generally you're only going to pick 3 to 5 that are global metrics. And at Splunk, our SREs run those global metrics. They do not create and run the service level metrics. They are stewards of the strategy and the practice to produce those, helping the service owners understand what their service level objectives should be, what the service level indicators for those objectives are, and then helping them set up to display those. Because those metrics may not be important to everybody, but for the service owners, they are. And usually at a service level, we see 5 to maybe even 10 or 15 metrics, but it can be dangerous once you start to get over 6 or 7 metrics, because too much information can also be crippling. So what the SREs will do will support deploy prep. Before any service goes into production at Splunk, it goes through a service maturity model or a checklist. The SREs own this checklist. And yes, it's a gate, but it's a gate for new services or dramatically refactored services to make sure that they are observable and they have the best context and the best setup to support those services in production. The next thing is our SREs own the on-call strategy. What does that mean? Well, our SREs are on call, but for third-party services, not for all services. Developers are on call for their services. So they own the strategy of setting up rotations, schedules, escalations, etc., and also making sure that they take into consideration you don't want to burn out your developers. So how you set up your rotations matters a lot. And then they own, again, the team level dashboards. Well, this is all great, and this is extremely powerful, but there is tooling that brings the context to all of this. And that tooling falls under the category of observability. Observability is really SRE's best friend. If you're a good curmudgeon like me, and you heard the term observability and your first thought is, isn't this just monitoring? Yes, you're right. All techies are really good at scrutinizing terms until they're the ones who adopted them. Then they will stand by them all day long. I did it for DevOps. I didn't do it for SRE. I believed in that one. And I did it for observability as well, even though I work for a company who builds observability tooling. So yes, it's monitoring. That's what observability is. So why do we have a different term? Why do we abbreviate it O11Y? If you're really cool, why do we call it Ollie? Well, the reason we have these terms is everything I said at the very beginning. The nature of applications have changed. So how we monitor them is different. Because of this, we need a term that encapsulates that new set of complexity. That's what observability is. Observability is essentially understanding what is happening inside of a system by the output of the system. So in the traditional monitoring world, where you looked at dashboards and waited for alerts, it was a pull model. You went and found the issue. You probably went directly to the log. In modern applications, you can't do that because the complexity is too much to keep a mental model in your head. So the systems have to tell you what's happening and where to focus. Because an API gateway may throw an error, but the API gateway is not actually what's broken. So if you were to just go to the log of the API gateway, you'd be going down the wrong path. That's what observability is, and that's why it's important. That incidents are pushed to you. They have great context and resources to find the data. So observability starts with the data. We're used to metrics and logs. Now we add traces, and traces have spans. Traces are all the hops, the transactions through your application in every service, and all the calls within inside of those services. It's a development and a deployment strategy, because how you instrument, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, is very, very important. It's an approach to monitoring. It is monitoring. in service of making on-call better, not suck as much, because it still is painful. And then finally is the tooling that does it. And the tooling comes in the form of incident response, synthetics, real user monitoring, application performance monitoring, which is APM, and infrastructure monitoring. All of those together have to come together for a true observability practice. When do you consider observability? Well, when your infrastructure, your configuration, and your code boundaries blur. Observability is not for everything. It will not be probably for your monolithic applications or your lift and shift applications in the cloud either. But when infrastructure, configuration, and cloud boundaries blur, things are ephemeral and stateless, meaning the service that has the problem may have already vanished by the time you try to investigate the issue, and as applications are increasingly distributed. But also when logs and metrics are simply not enough. You can't just look at a dashboard at a metric and dive directly to the log. As a matter of fact, in most scenarios, you don't need to go to the log at all. The log is the deepest resolution you can get of an issue. But if your systems are set up correctly, potentially the traces and spans and service maps are all you need. You don't need to go any, or even the incident itself, the context in the incident, and you don't need to go any further. So tech-enabled enterprises, and I use this term tech-enabled very deliberately. People say everyone's a software company. That's not true unless you're selling software. But every company is engaging with their end users more and more via software. So tech-enabled enterprises are building a practice of observability. They are supporting their SREs with this. They're having a true incident response strategy, which I will talk about. And once again, they're thinking about an embedded operational partner with SRE. The tools, once you get to the tools of observability, is first your instrumentation. You've heard the term garbage in, garbage out, but it's not just the garbage that you're worried about. It's how you transport that garbage as well. So how you get telemetry from your infrastructure and application to your management plane, your monitoring and your observability tools also matters. Incident response, which is distinctly different from incident management and ITSM. And then finally, dashboards and visualizations. So let's start with instrumentation, the very first step in getting data. We use this term at Splunk called GDI, getting data in. Well, instrumentation is very important, and it can be very limiting. You don't want how you instrument, either agent level, auto instrumentation, or code level, to dictate how you monitor. They need to be decoupled. Proprietary agents will tend to force you to monitor in a certain way. It shouldn't be that way. It should be vice versa. So how you instrument matters a lot. You have to decide, are you instrumenting in code? Can you scale that across a large development team? If you instrument in code, how are you applying tags or resources to your data to make it more rich? So because of the importance around instrumentation, we have focused on an open source project called OpenTelemetry. OpenTelemetry is an open source project that it removes the proprietary nature of getting data from your application into your management plane. And it allows enterprises to create a standard for how they collect data. In OpenTelemetry, you have receivers. That's where you get the data from. You have processors where you can do batches and manipulation of the data in stream, which is super powerful dealing with things like PII. And then you have exporters, which is the destination. There is a really strong community around the OpenTelemetry project. Splunk has resources that we commit to the project, and we are standardizing on this because our customers are more successful when they leverage a tool like OpenTelemetry versus a proprietary agent. If you want to learn more about OpenTelemetry, because hopefully if you haven't heard of it, you've heard of it now. We actually made a fun little game for you to play. You can go to pipestorm.splunk.com to play it. So now we've talked about how you get the data in, and we firmly believe that you should democratize how you do that, and you should have more capabilities to in-stream processing so that, and not only that, by the way, OpenTelemetry allows you to send to multiple destinations at the same time. So you're not limited just to sending to one place. Logs can go one place, traces and spans can go another place. Could be multiple monitoring tools. It's totally up to you. But once you have this set up and you have your observability tool consuming this data and producing alerts, next part is being on call. You are on call right now. If you are an engineer, you are probably on call for something right now, not just your family. So being on call is very interesting because there is a lot that happens in a very short amount of time. And we underestimate the complexity of that, such that we kind of conflate these things, incident response and incident management. So that's the first thing I want to say is they're very different. When you get an alert, that's like the check engine light on your car. You know something broke, but you don't know exactly what. Maybe you have some experience and there's some smoke and you have a better understanding, but you don't have a clear picture. Mobilization is when you get the right person at the right place at the right time to support you. And so that's roadside assistance. They come to you. Maybe they fix the problem right there. They jump your car, they give you coolant, whatever. But maybe they don't. Maybe they need more tooling, so they take you back into the shop. There is a lot that happens there, and that mobilization in cloud-native applications is absolutely critical. That is incident response. It is distinctly different. Where incident management is like your Carfax. It's the history, the audit trail of everything that has happened with your automobile or your application over a long period of time via probably a ticketing system. They are very different things. And so it's important for organizations to embrace an incident response strategy, because what we've seen is that without an incident response strategy, you have an average of up to 45 minutes for just acknowledgement of an issue. And then in remediation, not only does it take a long amount of time and a lot of people, there's too many touch points, acknowledgement, Slack, or any sort of chat ops tools, documents, Confluence articles, etc. You have to hunt this information down. And finally, you go towards resolution, which is not just restarting a service. You have to wait for everything to come on board and start working again. Well, a true incident response strategy, and that was more akin to a ticketing strategy, is acknowledgement should be less than 2 minutes. You want to flatten the curve. You flatten the curve by treating incidents as an object or a document that is an aggregation of information. There's context, there's data, there's run books that are all automatically populated based on the type of incident. So that an operator, somebody who is on call and acknowledges the incident, can look at the incident itself and potentially have all the data they need to resolve it, making it very powerful and, of course, reducing MTTR, making the experience of on-call a little less painful, which also means reducing unplanned work and reducing burnout. So a good incident response strategy will also support the health of the team and those who are on call. So all of this comes together. You've gotten the alert from your observability tool that's fed your incident response tool. It's woken you up and you're looking now at a dashboard because it's linked you directly to a dashboard that's told you exactly, hopefully, what's going on. How you set up your dashboards is important. And more is less usually with dashboards. People get really uncomfortable with that. But you can visualize too much information. So in modern applications, we usually see a lot of organizations leverage service maps. Service maps then tend to translate into tags, tag spotlights, that you can slice the service map based on dimensions, which is tag metadata you've sent via OpenTelemetry to your monitoring plane. Then you start to get a good sense, is it the application, is it the front end, or is it the infrastructure? And you can really spend less time hunting for the issue and more time just addressing a specific issue. Because hunting time is wasted time. Just like there's this term, shaving the yak, just like trying to collaborate in complicated ways. So hopefully all of this gives you a sense that SREs, that role, that function, that culture is necessary to supporting modern applications. Observability is the practice and the tooling to make it happen. And with inside observability, you have to have a true incident response strategy and great context. You have to think about how you build dashboards. You have to think about how you run on call. Thank you for joining me. I will be in Q&A to answer any questions. You can also reach out to me. Thanks for joining my session, and thanks everybody who set up the event, because this is a lot of work. Have a great day.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much, Chris. And now let's kick off some Q&A. So first, I was just curious about your podcast, Tech a Sketch. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of you may have noticed Ashton's graphic recording that has been going on during the event, and it is absolutely amazing. So much fun. So about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I approached her because I was so thrilled with a few of the recordings that she did in my session, and we made a podcast. So you can look up Tech a Sketch on YouTube. It's very focused on the human side of the tech industry, so career development and culture and things of that sort.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. So I know you mentioned the transition or the transformation is really like a feature, and we should treat it as such. So, what are kind of tactics that you can use to get that type of work into the sprints or into the body of work that the teams are working on?
Mhm.
And then how do you get buy-in to do that? Because it is really important, and it never shows up on the sprint. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I kind of I think it does show up. In the last year, wow, geez, 2 years now, the number of random apps I've subscribed to has been many more than I normally would. But I've also unsubscribed from a whole bunch as well. And some of them had superior content. Like one was a remote learning app, and another was a fitness app. And the content was great, but I unsubscribed because of the quality of the application. It was
Mm.
obvious, and we're techies, so we can see an app and kind of reverse engineer what's going on behind the scenes. It's fairly intuitive, but you can tell the face of the application represents the engineering team. You can tell how successful the engineering team is behind an application, whether you know it or not. And that indirectly or directly impacts the customer experience, which thus impacts, churn. So I think those applications that have thought about the fact that we're not going to create a 6-month project to do SRE or a 6-month project to do the DevOps, which I've seen many, many times. We're going to treat it as a part of the functionality of the application. And we're not going to think about incidents anymore is the site being down. We're going to think about incidents in terms of the user experience, latency. And so I think is kind of happening or organically. Now, what you said is the most difficult term, which is buy-in. Buy-in is tough. And SRE practice, the culture, DevOps has to be a top-down, bottom-up thing. And if it's not coming down from the top down, the best way for that organization to change is for highly talented engineers to leave. And that is going to have I'm sure you've heard of the great exodus right now, or whatever they're referring to. People, wow, that's fun. Um, and
Must
it's
be on
always
call.
fun when it's another machine that's like screaming at you. So the great exodus right now, people leaving the organizations, and the talent pool is going to determine and be a forcing function for leaders of organizations to understand that we are engaging more and more with our end users via an app, and we need to take it seriously. Now, the cultural side of it, seems like it's super fluffy and something you can't measure. But I'd argue you're already measuring it. If you measure churn, if you measure adoption, If you measure usage of functionality, you're already measuring your organization's culture.
Love it. Yeah. So it shows up. It's just maybe not a ticket, and you can see it in the products you're using if that does show
Yeah.
up. I like that. All right, cool. So let's get a little bit more in the weeds as well on how to make this all happen, right? How do we operationalize these principles or this culture here, and what tactics do we use on the ground to implement these changes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of the like there's two approaches. The first approach is, I've seen successful. I mean, I'm sure there's many approaches. Stewardship is a big deal. And I believe that a big part of an SRE's role is stewardship. They're not just there to build dashboards and turn gears and manage an on call schedule. They're also stewards, which means that they have to deliberately set time to engage with developers and explain to them the importance of making their application observable, having high quality logs, being consistent across the organization. SREs should be joining your PIs. Your security team should be joining your PIs. They should be there. Somebody from the SRE team and the security team should be a part of your PI so they understand what's going on. So that's all an element of stewardship. And stewardship can be done in a lot of ways. If you're a large organization, one of the most efficient ways to do this is via dojos. So having regular dojos where you socialize this stuff across the organization and build mentorship. The second way is peer pressure. And I know that we talk about peer pressure as being a bad thing, but it works. So you can lead the witness, and some of the ways of doing that is treating monitoring in SRE as a product. So you are now a product manager and you are supporting your organization by delivering a product. If you think about it that way, then you have two versions of the product. The first version is you give access to the tools that the people need. So the developers get access to the tools they need, SREs, DevOps. That's it. They get a username and password. They're on their own. The second version of the product is the white glove version. That's where you really help them be successful. They get the standard dashboards that are pre-built and ready to go and going to support the organization. But the price to getting here is you have to complete an assessment, or you have to complete a checklist, or you have to use the right tools in the right way. And so what ends up happening is you start to find out that the smaller engineering teams that are going to the white glove version are having a better life. Their life is easier and they're more successful and they're not getting woken up as much and they're removing technical debt. And so their peers will come with them. It works very, very well.
Okay, great. All right. So if you want to keep the conversation going with Chris and I, we're going to head over to the Discord channel to do the breakout room.